Hi, I'm Yolanda and this is Speak On. Today we're talking about gender inequality in healthcare and how it affects women. The field of medicine is rife with gender disparities, leading to women's health issues being overlooked and discounted. Because of historical male dominance in medical and scientific research, illnesses and diseases that disproportionately affect women are massively under-researched, leaving doctors without a clear understanding of how to recognise and treat them. And that leads to doctors dismissing many female patients, including a lot of my friends who have endless issues when they go to the doctors. Luckily, there are amazing researchers, scientists, writers, journalists, and campaigners shining a light on how women's health is being hampered by gender bias. Gender biases that lead to the fact that women may be more likely to die of a heart attack if they have a male doctor, women being called hysterical or just flat out not believed. Today, I'm joined by Sarah Graham, founder of the blog Hysterical Women. Sarah is a freelance health journalist, and through her blog, she explores the sexism, paternalism, dismissal, and disbelief surrounding women's healthcare. Welcome, Sarah. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining me today. So let's get straight into it. Why is this the subject that you focus on?
So I guess in lots of ways, it's something that I sort of fell into writing about, kind of a bit by accident. So I've been freelance now for about 7 years, and when I first started out, I was doing a lot of quite general writing, really, about health, often for publications with a sort of female audience. So I was writing a lot about women's experiences, but it was sort of a little bit of everything, really. I was doing bits of mental health, I was doing bits of kind of gynae and sexual health, and a bit of all sorts. But what I kind of started to notice, I suppose, over a few years of writing about those issues was certain patterns, certain kind of experiences that almost no matter what subject I was writing about seemed to come up again and again and again, which was women saying that they'd been to the doctor and they felt like they weren't taken seriously, they were dismissed or fobbed off in some way. At that point, I was kind of in my mid to late 20s. I, hadn't had that many, hadn't had that many reasons to need to go to the doctors. I had been lucky to have relatively good health. But as a feminist, hearing all of these stories from women, of all ages, it just got me really angry. And so I suppose that it was kind of at that point and through those stories that I started digging into this a little bit more, and wanting to kind of connect the dots and figure out why this was happening and the impact that it was having on women and their lives.
Brilliant. I know you said you haven't been to the doctors that much. I don't know how many kind of experiences of gender inequalities you may have noticed that have happened to you, but even slight things. Like I went to the doctors recently, and I went to the gynecologist, and I had a brilliant female gynecologist. And I always thought I've been lucky. I've had like quite good like interactions with healthcare, etc. But when I saw that the female gynecologist, it was like night and day.
Mm.
I was like, oh, the questions she asked, how she spoke to me, everything was different. And I was like, I only want to see female doctors from now on. It's just the whole experience was completely different. And it started to make me realize that there were times I've spoken to maybe male doctors and stuff before, and they kind of weren't listening as well. They didn't ask me the right questions. They weren't really paying attention. And also times when I have said things that have been kind of a bit dismissed, or, oh, I'm sure it's nothing, or I'm sure it's this. And just all her responses were just so different. Have you found that kind of difference when you've, but like, I don't know, based on gender, when you've been to doctors or hospital?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like I say, I have, I'm very lucky that I've had relatively good health for most of my life so far. But looking back, once I started kind of putting these pieces together, there was this whole kind of mosaic, I suppose, of experiences and like you say, it's a bit of a cliche and a bit of a generalization, but particularly that kind of older male GP where there's the slightly paternalistic attitude. And I remember particularly kind of in my teens struggling with mental health issues and there being this very kind of dismissive attitude of, oh, this is just teenage girls, this is normal, this is nothing to worry about. And it just sort of being accepted that what I was really struggling with was normal and okay and not really anything to worry about, you know. And I think similar sorts of issues that I and friends have had around kind of hormonal contraception, and maybe going back and saying, actually this really isn't working for me, I feel really weird, or it's making my mood, you know, it's really affecting my mood and making me feel depressed or anxious, or it's making my skin really bad, or my periods are really erratic. And this kind of attitude again, that those sorts of things don't really matter, you know, that as long as you're not getting pregnant, anything else you should just sort of put up with.
Yeah.
And so definitely I think once I started looking at the bigger issues, a lot of those things did sort of slot into place, and I started thinking, actually, yeah, there was that time when that doctor was really dismissive and actually didn't take what I was saying very seriously, and I just kind of accepted it. And I think that's something that I hear about from a lot of women as well. You know, I'll start talking about the work that I do, and they kind of go, oh yeah, no, now you mention it, I had this experience and I just kind of didn't think anything of it. I just thought it was me, or, you know, I just kind of accepted that that's, you know, some doctors are like that. But yeah, once you kind of start looking at the bigger picture, I think you do notice it a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, tell me more about Hysterical Women. So when did you start it? How did you start it? And what kind of response did you get when you like started sharing articles on there?
Yeah, so I started it in October 2018.
Hmm.
And there were kind of a couple of things that triggered it really. So one was an article that I'd written for Stylist about a woman with endometriosis. And hers at that point was kind of one of the worst examples of these kinds of issues that I had come across. And it was that sort of classic thing that I've been talking about of, she was a teenage girl going to, I think, a male GP and saying, my periods are really bad, they're very heavy, they're very painful, I'm fainting at school.
Oh my goodness.
And, you know, really serious, like not normal amounts of period pain. And the doctor was very, very dismissive, very sexist. And it had taken her, I think, 10 years to be diagnosed with
Oh my
endometriosis,
gosh.
which, yeah, is just horrifying, really. You know, when
Yeah.
you think she'd been going since she was 13 years old, she was 23 when she was diagnosed. And by the time she was diagnosed, the endometriosis was so kind of widespread and extensive that it had done permanent damage to her bladder and her bowel.
Oh my God.
And so that story really, really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And she's a woman that I've stayed in touch with ever since, and kind of followed her health journey. And the other thing that really struck me about that story was that she'd been going to the doctor with her mum, and her mum had endometriosis and was saying to the doctors, you know, I've had endometriosis. Could it be this? Could we send her for investigations to see if this is what it is?
Yeah.
So these were two really informed women who were aware that the symptoms were not normal. They'd gone with a suggestion, we'd like to get this investigated. And the doctor basically turned around and said, no, she's just copying you, and
Oh
you've
my
planted this
God.
idea in her head, which I just thought was so shocking. So that was kind of a real turning point for me in going like, I was just so pissed off about it. I just thought,
Yeah.
you know, I'm hearing so many of these stories. This is a particularly bad one. There must be so many millions more like this out there. And the other thing that was sort of a trigger was I met up with a women's health activist just for a coffee. Really, we ended up going for cocktails because we got to the bar and they were doing happy hour, so we got cocktails instead of coffee, and just ended up kind of spending an hour or two putting the world to rights. And she lives with a condition called PMDD, which is a really severe form of PMS.
Okay.
And so we were talking about a lot of the issues around that. And again, similar attitudes from doctors that, oh, it's just PMS, everyone gets it, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Actually, you know, there are women with PMDD who are suicidally depressed every month, and it's
Oh my
having a
goodness.
serious impact on their lives. So I kind of came out of this meeting with her feeling, again, really pissed off, really kind of inspired to just do something about this, you know. And I thought, as a journalist, I have contacts, I have a bit of a platform already, but because I'm a freelancer, I'm not just writing for one publication, and these stories are sort of spread out. So they're for different publications. And I wanted a place, I suppose, to bring all of these stories and experiences together. And that was why I launched Hysterical Women. And the response has been amazing. I've had probably over 100 women submit stories. I have women getting in touch, on a weekly basis, sometimes a daily basis, saying, wow, this happened to me. And the thing I think that has really kind of validated my wanting to do this was the number of women that come to me and say, oh my God, I thought it was just me.
Mm.
Like I thought, like my doctor had convinced me so much that there was nothing wrong with me and it was all just in my head, that I actually thought I was just losing my mind and it was
Oh
just
my
all in my head.
gosh. Yeah.
And so stories like that of women going, thank you for this, because until I found your blog, I just thought it was me and I thought there was something wrong with me, has been so kind of humbling and gratifying to see.
Oh my goodness. That is, I literally just, my mouth was open for that entire thing. But it's nothing, it's crazy because it's nothing we haven't heard before.
Yeah.
We've all had friends who've had really bad periods, particularly endometriosis. We always hear horror stories about that.
Mm,
And how dismissed they've been. I remember just even at university, one of my friends that I lived with had it, and it was so bad she just couldn't do anything for
mm,
like the entire time. She just had to just not go, she did not attend, she just had to stay in bed, and it was really bad. And again, it's just like that dismissive, such as that medical gaslighting.
mm,
And it's like, who is that for? Who is that for, that you can't be bothered to work out what's wrong with someone? It's like your entire job. It's insane. And I guess having something like Hysterical Women is going to be a great resource for people that may be feeling that way. And then they can say, look, I saw this happened to someone else, and this is what it is. I suppose it gives people the tools to be able to better advocate for themselves.
Yeah, I hope so, certainly. And the book that I'm working on at the moment, I think, kind of takes that a step further in some ways. So the book will be slightly different from Hysterical Women, and it's going to have a different title,
Mm-hmm.
but it's very much sort of building on what I've been doing with Hysterical Women, and hopefully creating a real kind of resource that doesn't just that sort of goes beyond just sharing these women's stories and actually gives people a bit of a toolkit, I suppose, to
Mm-hmm.
help them advocate for themselves, to give them the resources, to understand, I suppose, also the structural issues at play, because I think one of the things that I've always been really frustrated by is, but like, why are doctors like this? Surely doctors don't go into the medical profession wanting to just dismiss people and send them away without answers.
Yeah.
So that's something that in the last couple of years I've become really interested in looking into and trying to understand how the pressures on the NHS and the gaps in research and all of these things contribute to a system where doctors, for all some of them say some things that are absolutely unforgivable, there are a lot of them who really do want to help,
Mm-hmm.
but are just not able to.
Yeah.
So it will kind of dig a bit deeper into those issues as well. And like I say, hopefully empower women to feel a bit better equipped. It's not always going to be possible to advocate for yourself successfully just because of the system that we're in, but hopefully it will give women just the confidence, I think, of knowing that they're not alone, knowing that there are resources and support services out there to kind of help them with this.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so how are women suffering when it comes to gender inequalities in healthcare? Because obviously you mentioned it, like, it's gaslighting. What other things can women face whether they're going to the doctors, whether they're in the hospital, what issues? Obviously we know we know already about the shocking fact that, like, Black women, mixed race women, Asian women are more likely to die in childbirth, and a lot of that is down to just not being listened to and believed. But what other things can people face?
I think another one of the big ones, like I mentioned, is that because conditions that predominantly affect women are typically so under researched, is that there is often a kind of lack of really good treatment pathways.
Mm.
So I think that's one of the ways in which it is most obvious. You know, if you look at things like PCOS, for example, a lot of women are basically just told to go on the pill until they want to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then there are kind of the issues with getting pregnant
Mm-hmm.
itself when you have PCOS. And endometriosis is another one. A lot of women, you know, although excision surgery is kind of the gold standard, a lot of women are put on hormonal contraceptives for a very long time, which
Mm-hmm.
mask the symptoms, you know, and
Yeah.
some might help for a short time, but they tend to not be a sort of long-term solution. So I think the lack of treatment pathways is a big one, and more generally a sort of lack of understanding about where these illnesses come from, how to treat them. Chronic illness is another one that I see lots and lots of problems with.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's the same two issues really. So things like ME, fibromyalgia, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which again affect a lot more women than men and are so under researched. You know, we don't know what causes these conditions. We don't really know how to treat them. But also, there are a lot of doctors who, because they haven't been taught about them in medical school, don't, you know, in the more extreme cases, just don't believe that these conditions exist. You see that
Yeah.
a lot with ME/CFS in particular. So it's difficult to get a diagnosis. Without a diagnosis, you can't get support, you know, in terms of workplace support or financial support if you're not able to work. And obviously you can't access any kind of treatment or care. So that's another really big one. I guess the, you know, the other thing is, which is kind of a broader issue across the board with the NHS, is about waiting lists and
Mm-hmm.
waiting times to be referred to specialists are, you know, whether it's mental health or gynecology or anything, it's really difficult for GPs to, even the GPs that are really supportive and want to help, to actually get their patients in front of specialists. And so, you know, a lot of the time, GPs will have to be trying to sort of manage these chronic complex conditions in primary care, you know, with the really short appointment times, and you haven't really got time to kind of properly finish, you know, figure anything out or come up with a good treatment plan. So there's a lot of trial and error involved.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, how did we, well, we kind of know how we got here really, but how did we get here, and why are we still here? Why are things still so slow? Is this because of, you know, like I was saying earlier, it's like, it's male dominated. So research into women's health issues is just, I mean, practically non-existent. History, evolution, the patriarchy. But yeah, how did we get here? But why, and why are we still here? Like, whereas, is it moving as slowly as we think, or are things moving faster?
In terms of how we got here, I think it is all of the things you mentioned. You know, it is centuries and centuries and centuries of a patriarchal medical system
Mm-hmm.
that has been dominated by men,
Mm-hmm.
and where women's health has kind of been devalued and deprioritized. I think we are moving in the right direction,
Mm-hmm.
but I think actually, like, almost like any equalities issue, you know, whether you're talking about gender or race or anything else, the pace is slow, because there's a lot of, I suppose there's a lot of groundwork to do. There's a lot of catching up to do, in terms of the research, and research in particular is expensive. Retraining doctors and, you know, adding to the existing knowledge that they have is expensive and time consuming. And I think although there is a growing interest in funding more of this research, I think that there is still not enough kind of priority given to researching some of these issues.
Yeah, interesting. And I talked before about receiving very different care based on like having a female doctor. Um, when in your research, have you found that women do receive better care when their healthcare professional is the same gender?
I would say no, not necessarily at all. I think it very much depends on the individual doctor. One of the examples that I quite often give is actually a lot of the time, and people are people are often quite surprised by this, but a lot of the time I hear stories about, older female. A lot of the time I hear stories about female GPs who, particularly with kind of period related issues, a female patient will come in and say, I'm having very painful periods, or I'm getting very severe PMS. And I think because as a female GP, they think they understand what periods are like, there is sometimes a little bit more of an inclination, and this is a massive generalization, and it isn't always the case at all, but I think there is a bit more of a generalization to go, oh well, I have period pain, I just take some painkillers and get on with it, like it's just something as women that we all have to deal with. What are you complaining about? Get over it. And like I say, this isn't the case at all, and similarly you come across a lot of very dismissive attitudes from male doctors, but yeah, I would absolutely say that it's not a kind of clear cut women are supportive and men are not. Equally I hear stories from women where the first doctor that actually listened to them and paid attention to them was a man. So I think it is very much an individual thing, and it comes down to that individual's perhaps training, perhaps having a particular understanding of certain issues, or just how receptive they are to their patient and to listening and working with their patient. I think to some extent there is perhaps a bit of a generational issue, where older doctors were trained in a slightly more paternalistic style, where there was that kind of doctor knows best, and you would that you very much kind of, they said this is the problem, this is the treatment, and you did as you were told. Whereas I think, modern medicine, the training tends to be a little bit more collaborative, a bit more, about working with the patient to understand what their concerns are, what their expectations are, what they want out of the consultation. So I think, there are generational issues as much as there are gendered ones. But again, that's not necessarily to say that every younger doctor will be super supportive and collaborative. It's very much an individual thing.
Yeah. And what has surprised you most? Like, what have you learned that surprised you most since launching Hysterical Women and doing your research for your book? Is there something that you've come across and you're like, this is brand new information? What the hell?
I don't know if there's anything kind of massive that I would say. I think, I'm constantly being shocked by some of the things that doctors say to their patients. And God, there are just dozens of those examples. I launched a series on my Instagram last year called Shit My Doctor Says. And some of the quotes that get submitted to that are like, just constantly blow my mind. I mean, they are really kind of the most extreme end of medical misogyny, really. So a lot of those I find really shocking.
What kind of things have people said?
God, the worst one, the one that always sticks with me, actually, it was a female medic who submitted it, and she said that she had been working in theatre with a surgeon who hated doing the laparoscopy surgeries for suspected endometriosis, because he said that all women with suspected endometriosis were just fucking mental. and that just like, to actually hear him say that, and to a colleague as well, to a female colleague, that before he'd even gone into surgery to do the diagnostic procedure, he was just writing them off kind of as an entire group. The other one that always really sticks with me was, there was a woman, and again, we talked earlier about contraception and side effects. There was a woman who had been in for her smear test. And during the smear test, her doctor had kind of asked her all the standard questions, are you sexually active? What type of contraception do you use? And she had explained that she had been on the pill and she had stopped taking it because it had a really bad impact on her mental health and she didn't like the way it made her feel. And literally, while he had a speculum inside her, he said, "Oh yeah, lots of women tell me that, but I don't believe them."
What?
Literally, while he's got a speculum inside her vagina. And I just think, this is what we're up against to some extent. And this is obviously the more extreme examples.
Yeah.
But these are doctors who are perfectly willing to say out loud to their colleagues and to their patients that they don't believe women, that they don't trust women. And so that is something that has really shocked me, because I think I thought that it was all a lot more kind of subtle and insidious and kind of below the surface. And a lot of it is. But it does still always shock me when you do come across healthcare professionals like that who are just so blatant and blunt about it. I think the other thing that has surprised me, perhaps in a different way, is just how widespread the issue is across the whole of healthcare. So, there are areas where you see it most. So gynecology, you see a lot of it. You see a lot of it in perinatal healthcare. But actually, I see it in mental health care. I see it in all kinds of physical healthcare, women having heart attacks, women with pneumonia, women with pancreatitis who are told, oh, it's just because you're too fat, go away and lose weight.
Yeah.
So actually that, the way that it sort of cuts across the board, it's not just the female specific issues that you might necessarily think of. It's even the things that you would think would be gender neutral, like heart attack care, like the fact that women are more likely to die from a heart attack. Stuff like that, I think, has surprised me, perhaps more than anything.
My goodness. And all these kind of things that you're finding out, in your research, have you found that healthcare professionals are actively being told these things, like, as it's going on, so they're aware that they basically could let someone die of a heart attack? Are they being told, or is it something that you'd only find out if you look?
I think it's something that a lot of doctors are not necessarily aware of.
Which is scary.
Yeah. I think actually, so one of the things that my book is also really doing is kind of highlighting the role that patient advocacy and activism has had in raising awareness about these issues. If you think, like the example you gave about maternal mortality, if you think of campaigns like 5 times more, the number of doctors and maternity care staff who are aware of these issues as a result of the 5 times more campaign and Black women coming out and sharing their stories is huge. That's a really significant thing. And that's been very, very important, I think, in kind of forcing doctors and the healthcare profession as a whole to confront some of these biases. Because I think there isn't a huge amount that's being done, like you say, unless doctors are kind of actively seeking it out or they've got a particular interest in a really niche area. That they wouldn't necessarily be conscious that they were bringing biases to work. In just like anyone with any job, brings their own biases to it. So no, I think that is where patient advocacy and things like social media, which a lot of doctors are active on, are actually really powerful for that. And campaigns like Make Menopause Matter is another really good example of a campaign that has really got this very, very neglected health issue on the kind of political agenda. It's got people talking about it in Parliament. It's got GPs having conversations about how can we do better with this. So I think that is something actually that I really wanted to celebrate with this book in particular, that women's voices, and to some extent people of other marginalised genders. So I also speak to trans and non-binary people in the book about the issues that they face, which I think, you know, in lots of ways are even more overlooked and even more kind of stigmatized, because, you know, a lot of doctors might never come across a trans patient in their career so far. So I think, you know, patients speaking out, for all that's a very difficult thing, and you have to be in kind of in the right headspace to be able to do that. I do think it's a really important aspect of how we tackle this.
That's, yeah, I mean, social media, obviously it can be terrible, but this is what it's good for, and helping people find a community of people that understand what's happening to them, the ability to share their stories so that they can, I suppose, like you're saying, advocate for themselves. The educational factor of that is all really, really good. So yeah, that's awesome. So how can we start to address this gender inequality? So you've talked about different campaigns. Obviously your book's coming out, there are other books that talk about these gender inequalities, etc. What other things can we be doing to address this, and what can individuals do? Even if it doesn't affect us, what can we do?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's a really complex issue that there isn't kind of one single overnight fix where we click our fingers and it's all going to be different tomorrow. I think, you know, as we've said, research is really important. One of the things that I always say that's a really kind of, it feels like a very boring, unsexy type of activism, but if you can donate to research charities, that's a really, you know, simple thing that makes a difference. But I think the other thing is that we need to be putting pressure on government and the people that really have the power and the big cash to invest in these kind of things, to put their money where their mouth is, really. It shouldn't all just be down to charities going, please give us money and we'll research this thing. So I think that's a really big issue. I think there are big issues around training for doctors, and I think that we need to be addressing this in medical schools, both in terms of actually how to confront bias in your everyday practice as a doctor, but also, making sure that we have the research and that we're covering these little known conditions, even if it's just saying, this is a condition that you might see, we don't know very much about it, but here's how to identify it, for example, and here's what, here's the specialist you need to refer on to. Because I think, with a lot of particularly chronic illnesses, GPs just don't really know what they are. And so they don't know who to refer to. They don't know kind of what the pathways are. They don't kind of identify or diagnose things. So I think that's a really big thing. Yeah, again, that's a really difficult thing. It kind of comes from putting pressure on the medical establishment, on medical schools. Engaging with medical professionals is really useful, and there are kind of lots and lots of different ways of doing that. We've talked about the role of social media, and I think that is a really good way of having that kind of direct one-on-one interaction. I think if you have the time and the resources and the kind of, emotional capacity to be able to do it, starting a campaign about something specific, that's not something that everyone can do. But if you can, then great, go for it. Get these things on the political agenda and start talking to, the people that have the power to make a difference. I think smaller things as well can be really useful, whether that's just sort of signing a petition or joining a community of people that are affected by similar issues to you. One of the things that I'm always really inspired by is the number of communities, for various different conditions, where people are sharing information and sharing resources. So if someone is really struggling to get a diagnosis or to get an appropriate treatment from their doctor, they can find out information, they can empower themselves with that sort of knowledge to be able to take back to their GP and say, okay, could it be this? Could we look at that? And obviously, that how successful that is depends on how receptive your GP is.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that is a really useful way that people are kind of pooling their resources and sharing knowledge in that way.
And when people, let's say somebody's done some research, they found something out and take it to doctors, what's the next step that people can take if their doctor's like, no? Like, so thinking it's because sometimes you could be like, this is the thing that's happened. I know, for example, I was talking to my mum, and she was talking about one of her friends having a specific medical condition that in a different country, the marker is literally different for, I suppose the parameter is a bit different than it is here. It's much narrower here, and she falls just outside of it, so they won't treat her. But if she lived in a different country, she would get treated for it. And she went on holiday, she was ill, she got treated for it because that's what was wrong, because their parameters are different. And also her parameters were different based on her race as well. So but she said to the doctors plenty of times, I've looked into it, this is what it is, and they've just said no. So should people at that point say, okay, that's it, I'm tapping out, I need to swap doctors? Like, what do people do next? How can people advocate for themselves when things are getting tricky for them?
It is really difficult, and that actually is another really interesting example of, you know, a lot of these issues again that are under research that mostly affect women. There aren't always diagnostic tests for them, or there aren't straightforward diagnostic tests for them, and so women struggle to be diagnosed because doctors are very kind of reliant on having something objective, something that's, yes, this blood test shows X, or yes, this scan shows Y, rather than just having, I suppose, the confidence to diagnose based on symptoms and based on kind of putting together a clinical history. And that is another really big challenge. I think in terms of advocating for yourself, it's really difficult. And again, I'm always very kind of clear that, you know, if you are not able to advocate for yourself, it's not your fault. Women should not have to advocate for themselves in order to get the care that they deserve. And if you receive bad care, it's not because you did not try hard enough. Having said that, like, there are some kind of tips that I've definitely picked up over the years. So one of the things is around sort of tracking symptoms, being really, really specific. So quite often I'll say to women, keep a diary and be really specific, not just about the symptoms, but about the impact that it's having on your life. So if you're having to miss 2 weeks out of 4 off work because you're so ill, put that in there. You know, what is the impact this is having on your life? So that when you take that to your doctor, they understand you're not just saying, oh, you know, I'm in a bit of pain, can you give me something? Actually, this is how it's affecting me, and I need you to do something about it. Having research, having particularly kind of nice guidelines and things can be useful in terms of if it's something the doctor isn't very familiar with, just saying, look, this is what it says in the nice guidelines. Can we do this? Can we try that? Or can I be referred to such and such specialist? I think if you're really kind of coming up against a brick wall with your GP and they are just not receptive, not listening to what you're saying, it's always worth getting a second opinion. So is there another GP at your surgery that you could speak to instead? One of the things that I learned only a couple of years ago, which has been so useful for me, and I tell this to everyone, is most GP surgeries on their website will have a list of all of the doctors, including the kind of special interests that those doctors have. So you might find that there's a doctor at your GP surgery who you've never even seen before, who has a particular special interest in your whatever the issue is that you're wanting to speak about. In which case, go and see them, because great, they already kind of know a little bit and they're interested. Obviously, there's no guarantee that will be the case, but that can be a really useful thing just to look at. The other things you can try are, you know, you can write to the practice manager and make a complaint if you feel like you're still really not getting anywhere. Most hospitals, or all hospitals in fact, have a PALS service, which is patient advice and liaison service. So if you're having issues with hospital specialists, you can get in touch with PALS and they will advocate on your behalf. And the other thing that I always say is, again, if you've kind of identified that you think you have a particular condition, or you've got a set of symptoms that kind of points towards a certain condition, there is almost certainly a charity, even if it's a tiny little charity for that condition. Get in touch with them, see if they've got a support group or some kind of helpline that you can call for advice, because they will have much more kind of specific advice tailored to your needs. I think those are sort of the main things that I usually say to people. But yeah, at the end of the day, just remember that, it is your doctor's job to serve you.
Yeah.
And if they're not doing that and you're not getting the care that you need, that's on them. It's not on you.
Wow, that's some really, really good advice there. I love that. I was really just kind of yeah, nodding along. That's brilliant, because there are so many people I know that are in that spot. So I'm definitely gonna have to pass those tips on to them,
The
because
other
I know
thing
they've had
actually
difficult
that
time.
sometimes is useful and sometimes isn't useful, it very much depends on the doctor, but sometimes just taking somebody along with you,
Yeah.
whether that's a partner or a friend, mum, whoever, and partly that's because, sometimes the doctor might just take you a bit more seriously because there's somebody there, but also it's because actually if they don't, you have a witness who can say to you, no, what you said was absolutely spot on. They were dismissive. It's not all in your head. This is how they behaved. And so just kind of having somebody to back you up, I think, can help with identifying when the behavior is gaslighting, when the doctor is, minimizing your experiences, so that you don't end up coming away going, oh God, is it all in my head after all? It's just
Because
me.
it's so easy to question yourself, even if you walked in and everything you said is 100%. The moment you leave, and if someone puts a set, like a little bit, 1% of doubt in your mind, that is enough for you to think, okay, no, maybe it's just me. And that's not helpful if if you are really suffering as well. Yeah, that must be so, so difficult. Well, I mean, I'm just so glad that your site exists and there's somewhere for women to go and share their stories and find support and get advice. And I can only imagine how many people it's going to help in terms of being able to identify things that are going to be able to make them say, okay, no, this is what's wrong. I mean, that's brilliant. When is your book coming out? And have you got any other plans for Hysterical Women at the moment, or are you just very focused on getting the book done?
Yeah, so basically the book, I'm writing it at the moment, it's due out next autumn, so autumn 2022, and I'm not allowed to say a huge amount about it.
Okay, that's fair enough.
It'll be published by Bloomsbury. And yes, very much that is my focus at the moment. So the blog is a little bit on hold. I've still got kind of the odd post scheduled coming up, but yeah, watch this space basically.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so, so much for joining me today, Sarah. Where would you like to be found online?
So I am on Twitter at Sarah Graham7. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Sarah Graham7 Writer. And you can find Hysterical Women at hystericalwomen.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Speak On. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, co-workers, strangers in the street. To find out more about us, including our upcoming events, head over to Instagram, instagram.com/speakon_. Bye!